Hello, everybody, and welcome to She is Unleashed podcast. This is season 5, episode 3. I am your host, Dr. Mirriam Knight, and I am so excited, y'all. I'm excited about today's conversation. We are in a season of Heal to Build. We are talking about what it means to heal from the inside out, that we may be able to build things that are long lasting, build legacy in this season, build intentionally in this season. I am also the CEO and founder of Destiny Connections LLC, where I serve alongside my husband, Benjamin Wilson, and we serve as high achieving, high demand leaders of faith. Whether you are a leader of faith in your business, leader of faith in your community, and what do I mean by a leader of faith? I mean someone whose faith is very core to who they are, core to how they function. It is the essence of your being. But you can be serving in the marketplace, especially if you are serving in the marketplace. It is our heart's desire. It is our assignment to serve you, to help you build systems, to help you build internal systems, healing from the things that may have wounded you on this journey, and allowing you and enabling you to walk the path of wholeness from the inside out, building things that will outlive you, building a legacy that you will be proud to pass on to your children and your children's children. Our motto, our vision's motto is healed leaders, building capacity, and building legacy. Healed leaders, expanding your capacity, and building legacy. That is our mission. That is our assignment, y'all. I apologize if my voice sounds a little off today. I am recovering from a cold, but I'm believing God that what He has for us on this episode today is so essential, so critical to this season that we are living in right now. So I'm going to go ahead and get this out today. So, what are we talking about today? This season of Heal to Build is an invitation to stop performing leadership and to start inhabiting it from a place of wholeness. Earlier today, I am recording this on a Sunday. It will be released on a Monday. I had the privilege and the honor of speaking at my church about being strengthened from the inside out and how it is so critical that God takes us through a process of healing and wholeness before He can expand our capacity. And we're going to dig into a little bit deeper of what that means today. In our last episode, we talked about why vision without healing eventually collapses. And today we'll go in deeper because even before collapse, there's a cost that comes when we do not take the time to heal. We're talking about the cost of carrying leadership while we are fragmented. And I'm going to explain a little bit later, what does it mean to be fragmented? Most leaders don't realize how much they're paying until they're exhausted, they're resentful, their marriages have fallen apart, their relationships have fallen apart, their health is falling apart, and they may feel very disconnected and eventually become numb to all the things that they're going through. But today's conversation is for the woman who's still standing. And even if you feel you're at that place where you feel like it's too late, I want to encourage you today, it's never too late. As long as there's breath in your lungs, as long as you're in this place where you're willing to learn and you're asking God to intervene in your situation, there's always a chance that God will come through and God will heal you, God will restore you, and He will allow you to finish well and to finish strong. Here's the thing. If you are that woman that knows that something inside you is splintered and you desire for God to heal you, here's the truth that we're trying to communicate in today's episode. Leadership can be carried while fragmented, but it cannot be carried without consequence. So if you are broken on the inside, splintered, fragmented on the inside, you can do it, you can try, you can do your best at it. But here's the thing. There's always a cost that comes when we continue to operate in that place. And by this, I don't mean that you're trying to heal. I mean that you've come to terms to say, this is just who I am and nothing can change this. I'm too far gone. Here's the thing. The longer you ignore the fragmentation of your soul and your spirit, the higher the cost becomes. I'm going to say that one more time. The longer fragmentation in your soul and your spirit is ignored, the higher the cost becomes. So let's talk about what fragmentation really is. Will define fragmentation not as weakness, not as failure, and not as a lack of faith. But fragmentation is what happens when parts of you learn to survive separately instead of integrating as a whole. In psychology, we often identify fragmentation as a result of different traumatic experiences that you've had in your life that have caused you to compartmentalize your life into these different segments. So there's a strong version of you that will show up in certain seasons or spaces. There's a weaker version of you. There's a more seductive version of you that shows up in another scenario. There's another version of you that is nonchalant and I don't care. Then there's another one. There's just all these different components of you, the survival components of you that show up in these different scenarios. Not because it's a healthy thing, but it's because this is how you've learned to survive and cope in different situations. And you really don't know how to operate as all of these things together. Now, all of us have different components of this in us, but we need to learn how to integrate all the different parts of our being into a whole. In the book, The Whole Leader, that is coming out this year, I'm so excited about this one too, because it really forms the core of what we do at Destiny Connections. Fragmentation occurs when different parts of the leader are carrying different assignments. Some are conscious assignments, some are unconscious, and some are inherited. And especially in the life of the leader, this may look strong on the outside. You may be highly competent, emotionally articulate, spiritually grounded, and professionally accomplished. But internally, there's different parts of you that are operating at the same time. There's the visionary part of you. There's the protector part of you. There's the performer part of you. There's the caretaker part of you. And then there's still the wounded child part of you. And leadership becomes exhausting, not because of the responsibility that you're carrying as a visionary, as a protector, as a performer, as a caretaker, as a child still not unhealed, but because there's an internal conflict between these different parts of you. For example, the visionary part of you might fight with the protector part of you because I see all the things you want to do, but the protector part of you says, don't take that risk. There might be a conflict between the performer part of you and then the part that wants to take care of you. The wounded child might be trying to fight and has all these temper tantrums, and you're looking at yourself almost like a depersonalization kind of experience, and you're like, what's going on? Who's that person? That's not me. That's not how I want to function. But it's different parts of you that keep showing up in different scenarios, and sometimes it even feels like you don't really have full control over who shows up in which situation. Now, as Nehemiah is preparing, we're looking through the lens of Nehemiah as we go through this podcast episode this season. And Nehemiah names something that we rarely talk about in leadership spaces. He says the strength of the laborers is falling. The wall that they needed to rebuild, it wasn't the problem. It was the fact that the builders themselves were fragmented. Build requires integration. For us to be able to build the things that God is calling us to build in this season, it requires that we integrate all the aspects of our story, the good, the bad, the ugly, and we allow God to bring this into a whole and make good out of the things that the enemy intended for evil. Proverbs 31 doesn't describe a woman pulling herself apart to get things done. It describes a woman that is clothed in strength, integrated, and not strained. Fragmentation says does not disqualify you from leadership, but it does increase the cost of carrying it. For many of us, we've learned how to function in the business world, in our careers, in a certain way. And then we find ourselves operating in a different persona when we get to our church spaces. And then there's a different persona that shows up in our home. And then another persona that shows up in our relationships with our friends. But what if we could bring all those pieces together? There's a little movie script that I saw the other time, and it was talking about just how we put on all these masks. And when we get so used to putting on masks, at one point we start forgetting who we really are. Who am I without the masks? Who am I? Just me, because we think that this is the part that is acceptable in all of these different settings. And so eventually we lose track of who the genuine, true core part of our being is. And as a result, at some point we start slipping up. And because we're tired and we're fatigued, that's when it starts to really crack and fragment. Is now there's parts of you that should show up in this situation, but instead show up in another situation. And it feels chaotic. It feels like confusion. So why are high capacity women more vulnerable to fragmentation than other people? We develop fragmentation early because we've got to learn how to compartmentalize our lives to survive. We learned this real early. As we were growing up, we learned that we were needed. We learned that our skills were necessary. We learned that we just got to do what we got to do to survive. And we learned real quick. our responsibility, the weight that was placed on our shoulders, came way before we were even given permission to rest. And because excellence eventually became our survival strategy, because if I'm not controlling it, if I'm not managing it, if I'm not coming out as the best, then it means that I don't have control over this situation. It means that I might have some loophole somewhere and someone's going to see my exposure. I'm going to be vulnerable if I don't get things done perfectly in a certain kind of way. In the book She is Unleashed, I wrote, many women often confuse maturity with self-abandonment. We think that if I'm mature, I've got to abandon myself, because no one has ever taught us as women, high achieving women, that there's another way to lead. We have learned that leadership and high performance and promotion comes at an expense to our souls and our spirits. High capacity women, high demand women, women that are pushed or promoted or worked to get to these places of leadership and influence and impact, we have learned to function. We have led through depletion. We produce through pressure, and we sometimes brag about it and talk about, I thrive in the pressure, I survive, and I thrive in chaos. Y'all, that is not God's desire for us. We care for others while we often bypass ourselves. Y'all, we may be literally, we will give people the last of the last, because that is what we've learned to do. That's what we've learned is the cost and the price of the assignment and the call, or this thing called leadership that we're carrying, right? And because it's worked, I'm going to say it's worked. It has worked in the past. We often this way of functioning often goes unquestioned until it doesn't, until it cracks, until it starts falling apart and unraveling. And then we start to have these questions, and then we start to wonder, could it be that there's more to life than just this? So let's talk about some of the hidden costs of fragmented leadership, and we're going to break them down and honestly. Number one is the cost to the body. And I learned this in a very personal way a couple of years ago when I ended up in the ER. And I was told I had anxiety, but when I came into the ER, I thought I was a stroke or an aneurysm, because experiencing things in my body that were unusual, that resembled an aneurysm or a stroke. Fragmented leadership often shows up in our bodies physically. And if you can take a check on any one of these, I want you to pay attention to what you're experiencing in your body. Chronic fatigue, you're tired all the time. Autoimmune issues, meaning that you are constantly either recovering from a cold, just your immune system feels all the way plummeted, right? Tension headaches. That year I had nonstop headaches. It didn't matter how many pills I took. It didn't matter what the composition of the medication was. The headaches just would not go away, and it started creating migraines, and it started affecting my sight. There was just so much going on. There was tingling sensations in my body, numbness in my body, digestive problems where you either have constipation, yeah, I'm going there today, y'all. Or you have diarrhea, or you're throwing up, or it's just all these digestive stuff because your stomach's complaining, right? Hormonal imbalances, your skin's breaking out, your nails are fragile, your hair is falling out, just your hormones again. It mood all over the place, insomnia, not able to sleep at night. Why do we experience these things? Because the internal parts of our being are at odds. The internal parts of our soul are at odds with each other, and our nervous system never fully rests. Some of us, we barely go to sleep and get a good night's rest because we're sleeping with one eye closed, constantly hypervigilant and watching for the next thing that's going to happen. We don't feel safe in our own bodies. We feel like we need to be on guard 24/7. Now, Nehemiah, he names something that we rarely talk about in leadership spaces. He says, he articulates the issue, and he says the strength of the laborers is failing. The wall, again, wasn't the problem, but the builders themselves were the ones that were fragmented. Here's the thing. Fragmentation, again, results when we do not count the cost of carrying the fragmentation, right? In the whole leader intensive, we teach people that the body carries what leadership refuses to feel. And in the book, The Body Keeps Score, it talks about if we won't communicate our boundaries and our limitations of capacity, that the body will eventually start talking for us. It's not betraying you, it's communicating to you, sis, man, something's up, something's not right, right? So we have to learn to pay attention to what it is costing us in our physical bodies. The second thing that it costs us is our emotional intimacy. Fragmented leaders struggle to be fully present. They may be physically present, but emotionally distant. Have you ever heard someone say that to you? Yeah, you're here in the room, you're in the car with me, but I don't feel like you're really here. I don't feel like you're present. You may be generous, you might give, but deep down inside, there's resentment. And we don't even like to admit that. We won't even want to disclose that. But if you really interrogate what you're feeling when you give, you find that there's some underlying resentment. We may be loving, but guarded, y'all. Loving, but guarded. We love people, but we won't let them in. We'll listen to all they need and we will give of ourselves, but we won't let them. We'll give of ourselves in many other ways, but we will guard and protect our souls. Why? Because emotional intimacy requires integration. And if parts of you are constantly bracing, protecting, or performing, connection often feels risky. It feels like it comes at too high a price. Leadership that is carried from fragmentation often leads to emotional loneliness, difficulty receiving care. We can't ask for help, and it makes us feel unseen even while visible. We might be showing up at all the things, but we may feel like no one's really seeing us. The third thing that it costs us is the cost to decision making. Fragmentation, it clouds our discernment because we are all over the place. We find ourselves surrounded by noise, so many different opinions. It's the visionary opinion, it's the protector opinion, it's the provider, the caregiver, and then we hear the whisper of the little child that's unhealed, right? All these voices, the noise, the static, it clouds our discernment and our ability to hear clearly. The different parts of us that are fragmented want different things. One part wants rest, the other part wants validation, the other one wants obedience, the other part wants safety. It's all over the place. And we're like, what do you really want? We want all of them at the same time. And it can feel really heavy and it can make us delay our decisions or second guess all the decisions that we're making. In Born for This, another book that's coming out this year, I wrote, confusion is often not the lack of clarity. It is the presence of too many unintegrated voices. Healing doesn't silence voice wisdom, y'all. It organizes it. So when we heal, we're able to put all the information in the right categories and organize it and make sense of it. There is clarity. There is a clear signal of what needs to be done when we walk in a place of healing rather than fragmentation. The fourth thing that it costs you is the cost to your leadership impact. Fragmented leaders often overfunction for teams. We rescue people instead of developing more leaders and developing others. We're constantly intervening and jumping into situations. We carry a lot of emotional weight from all the people that we're serving, and that's not our weight to carry. And we struggle to release control. Why? Because when you're fragmented internally, you compensate externally. If you feel insecure within, you're going to try to find your security in all these external things that you do. If you don't feel like you know who you are inside, you're going to look for affirmation and validation from everyone around you. And as a result of that, leadership becomes heavier than it needs to be. And the teams that you are serving, the teams you're serving with, they feel it even if they can't pinpoint and name what it is exactly that's going on with you. Listen, sis, fragmentation, it's not a character flaw. Let me say this very clearly. Fragmentation is not a moral failure, but it is an adaptive response. It's one that was formed through traumatic experiences that dismantled you, experiences that fragmented you in an effort to survive those situations. Listen, you fragmented at some point in the past because it wasn't safe to feel everything. It wasn't allowed to slow down. It wasn't possible to be fully seen. And God does not shame you for the adaptations that once kept you alive. These things kept you alive back then. But here's the thing. In the whole leader, I say, healing honors what survival built. We can honor what we have become, what we've accomplished, how far we've come, and where we are without allowing our past and the things that we've developed to become the ones that remain in charge. Healing is not about erasing parts of you, but it is bringing and pulling all those parts of you back into alignment, back into God's original design for your life. So, what is the biblical pattern for integration? Scripture constantly shows us that leaders who had to be integrated, they couldn't lead fully until that happened. So let's take some examples from the word. David, he had to reconcile what it meant to be a shepherd and both a king. He was both. Even when he was in the palace, he didn't discard and erase being a shepherd. God required that part of him as a necessary component to his being king. The heart of a shepherd was necessary in how he would function as a king. But if he left that as two separate entities, compartmentalized and fragmented, he would not have been able to be the king that God needed him to be. He had to reconcile the warrior and the poet. If he was looking for affirmation and validation from people, he would have tried to hide the poet side of him because it was too embarrassing or too soft. But he was both warrior and poet. There was also the authority that he had as a king, authority as a man of God, authority that he has as the anointed one of God. And yet there was also the tender side of him that was a lover of God, that was a lover of his wife, that was a lover of his children. He had to reconcile, how can I walk in authority and yet also walk in tenderness? That was a hard thing to do, but it was necessary again for God to be able to use him in the way that he did. Elijah collapsed not because he lacked faith, but because he carried too much alone. Even Jesus withdrew regularly, not as avoidance, but as regulation. He created these rhythms in his life that allowed him to function from a place of wholeness rather than fragmentation. See, God does not demand fragmentation in our leadership, but he invites us to a place of wholeness. And it's going to require us to actually give him all the scattered, fragmented pieces of our lives. We'll talk about that a little more in a second. So, what does healed leadership feel like? Healed leadership feels different. It feels spacious. It feels grounded. It feels clear. It feels regulated. It feels honest. If you just hear those words, I'm going to say them over again. I wanted you to hear and feel in your body what hearing those words brings to you. So spacious, grounded, clear, regulated, honest. You still lead, sis. You still carry responsibility, but you are no longer carrying yourself in pieces. Think about a man that is trying to juggle many balls. At some point, there's anxiety that builds up in you, tension that builds up in you. But when you reconcile all the pieces into one whole, you recognize that it's actually just one assignment. Now, this the Holy Spirit is dropping in my heart real quick right now. I remember probably the beginning of last year when my husband and I were having a conversation. We had all these different responsibilities that were being placed on our plate for him and then for me. And it was becoming so hard for us to merge our lives or integrate our lives and function as one. And we had to sit down and say, you know what God has called us to do is the same thing. We are one. So what is the one assignment? What is the one calling that God has placed on our lives that we need to understand and come to terms with? How do we bring all these different pieces of our lives into one mission, one vision, one assignment that just manifests in different ways? And I promise you, the moment we did that, and that's a challenge to some of y'all that are married, that are couples, to sit down and just say, okay, here's your gifts, here's your talents, here's your background, here's my background, here's all the things that we bring to the table as two different human beings. But if God brought us together, he brought us together that we might be complete together, not fragmented and pulling each other in different directions. But we have to come into an understanding of how all the pieces fit together and work together. And we talk about that in our One Forever Marriage programs, about how high achieving couples individuals can come together and learn to not just survive each other's differences and uniqueness, but how to actually celebrate our differences and recognize that God put you together for a reason, with the differences in your abilities and your skills for his purpose. And once those things click in, oh my goodness, you're about to be this most dynamic duo for the kingdom of God. And that's why the enemy fights us so much in that area. He wants us to see each other as enemies, see each other as threats, not just in marriages, but relationships. When we recognize that it's not just marriages that God puts together, but it's friendships, it's partnerships, it's collaborations, and it's not a competition, but it is a collaboration when God is the one guiding this coming together, right? So wholeness, again, is not the absence of pressure. It is the presence of internal agreement. When we're not fighting ourselves inside, but there's a coming together of the pieces to see that I am this and this and this and this, and they all work together in unity instead of fighting one another, our internal world starts to align and leadership stops draining life out of us. Actually, it begins to function as a whole and starts to generate life from the inside out. So here's a question I want to pose to you as we wrap up today. Where are you carrying leadership while fragmented? And which part of you has been working over time? What would it look like, sis, for you to lead without abandoning yourself? Those are the three questions that I want you to consider as we end today's podcast. Where are you carrying leadership while fragmented? Are there places of your soul and your life, your heart, your mind, your body that you need to attend to? Are there pieces of you that feel scattered and all over the place that you need to allow God to bring into integration? Which part of you has been working overtime? Sometimes it's the visionary, sometimes it's the caregiver, but then there's also the woman part of you, the feminine part of you that needs to be nurtured and cared for. And a lot of times that's the first one we throw out the door, that we neglect and we put to the side because we feel like we can't attend to her. If we do, we're going to feel like the rest of the world is going to fall apart. And God wants us to hear him saying, it's not. You actually need to attend to her more. And if you attend to this part of you, I promise you that everything else is going to flourish so much more. But when we recognize that the feminine, soft, gentle part of us that God, I said this to someone the other day, that's the part of God, the DNA of God that he has put specifically in us as women, that we are that part, that reflection of him. And the enemy wants to harden us. The enemy wants to corrupt that part of us so much because he knows that that is the part of us that reflects God to the world. When we are the feminine, soft, gentle, kind, yet also visionary, creative, all those things at the same time. We don't have to choose between these different components of who he created us to be. We got to recognize that they're all pieces of a puzzle, all parts of this tapestry that are woven together by our creator to create a beautiful masterpiece. We are God's masterpiece, y'all, masterpiece, designed with every component of who you are, your uniqueness, your story, your personality, your quirks, all of it. It's all supposed to come together, right? What would it look like, sis, for you to lead without abandoning yourself? Without rejecting yourself and parts of yourself? What would that look like? Healing does not disqualify you from leadership, sis. It stabilizes you for what is coming next. There are some great things that God has in store for you this year, great things that he wants to do in and through your life. But if you feel and sense him saying, daughter, maybe pull back a little bit so we can work on that inside stuff, so we can create some stability on the inside, I pray that you would hear his call. You would hear the nudge of his spirit beckoning you to come close so that he can heal your heart. He can heal your mind. He can show you how all the pieces of your entire being come together in this beautiful, beautiful picture that God ordained, that God wrote before the beginning of time. As we close out today, my prayer for you is, God, I bring every part of each woman that is listening to this podcast today, not just the polished pieces of her, Father God. I pray that you would heal the places where leadership has required fragmentation, where the enemy has kept her in a constant mode of survival and division within herself, Lord, where she's constantly dialoguing and fighting within herself, Lord, about which part of her needs to show up in any given situation. God, I pray that she would hear your voice saying she can be both. both. She can be this and that. It doesn't have to be this or that. And Father, I pray that you would help her, help us, help me, Lord, to lead from a place of wholeness and not endurance and not survival. This is my prayer, and I pray that you would hear the Lord speaking to you and calling you again into that place of wholeness. Listen, sis, this is the work that we do in the She is Unleashed Collective. It is the work that we do through all our resources and materials that are available on our website at www.destiny-connections.com. And listen, stay posted for some events that are coming up this year. Right now, we are in the middle of the 42-day build reset. And I promise you, God is doing some crazy, crazy things in this place. The next round and the next intake is coming at the beginning of the second quarter. And I promise you don't want to miss that. But I also want to extend this invitation for you to join us in the She is Unleashed Collective. Registration will be open in the next coming weeks. We will be kicking off on February 1st with the She is Unleashed Collective, this first round for 2026. And it's about to be explosive because we're about to support you to build a thing that God has placed on your heart, whether it's that ministry, that business, that book that you've been putting off. There is something that God is calling you to build in this season, and we're here to support you in that journey. Listen, you don't need to stop leading. You only need to stop leading yourself alone inside yourself. In the next episode, we'll be talking about nervous system leadership, how to regulate before you scale, because regulation is the bridge between healing and sustainable expansion. Sis, it is your time to heal. Heal before you build. Heal before you expand. I pray that something in this episode has been a blessing to you. And if it has, please feel free to drop a note and a comment in the chat below, or send us an email at connect@destiny-connections.com. Let us know how these podcast episodes are impacting your life, being a blessing to you. Share it with somebody, spread the word. We want to make sure that every woman is walking in healing in 2026 and experiencing the overflow of what God has for their lives. Y'all, I will see you in the next episode. God bless you and have a phenomenal week. Take care.